Hi there, I'm here inside Jupyter, and in order to have everything organized, I will go to the desktop and then to the folder we have created for this course. Here we have all the programs we wrote so far. Inside here, I will place a new folder by going to New, Folder. We have to select it here and press Rename to pick a name for this folder. I'm gonna name it Machine Learning. So this is where I'm going to save all the Jupyter files from this section. So let's start a new one. And let's name it Iris Dataset, which is going to be our first example. The Iris Dataset is a very common example. It is used in multiple books and courses about machine learning due to its simplicity and due to the fact that we can import the dataset directly from scikit-learn. Before we do this, let's see what this dataset is about. In 1936, the biologist Ronald Fisher collected 150 samples of iris flowers, divided into 50 samples of 3 different species. From each of them, he took the measurements of the petal and the sepal. This is more or less the dataset he ended up with. We are going to call each line in this table an observation. For each observation, we have petal length, petal width, sepal length, and sepal width. We also have the species. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna use these 150 observations to train our computer. We're going to apply statistical models to make our computer learn to identify the species of an iris flower by its measurements. After we do it, we can just give our computer some new measurements of an iris flower, and it is going to tell us from which species it is, with a very low error rate. This is going to be a great way to understand how machine learning works. So to get started, let's import the Iris dataset from scikit-learn. So we can just type from sklearn.datasets import load iris. Then we're going to create a new variable called iris, and we are going to run a function called load iris. Now let's see what we have inside this variable. If you don't want to click run all the time, you can use a shortcut. In order to see the shortcuts, you can press Command-Shift-P. Then you can just look for what you want, which in this case is run. So here we have a shortcut to run cell and select next, which is Shift-Enter. So let's try it out, Shift-Enter. So this is the data we have inside the iris variable. This variable looks like a dictionary. So we can see the curly braces, and we also have some key value pairs. So we have a key called data, and here we have the value associated to this property. If you go down, you're going to see some more information inside this variable. At this moment, we're just interested in 2 properties. One of them is the data property. So let's just print iris.data. What we have here are the measurements for each observation. So each line is an observation with those 4 measurements. Note that the classification of the species is not here. So in the data attribute, we only have the measurement. The species are stored in another attribute called target. So let's print the target. So here we have all the 150 species one by one. This means that for this first observation, this is the species number. For the second observation, this is the species, and so on. The reason why the species are represented by numbers is because every time we work with machine learning in scikit-learn, we must have both the observations and the target as numeric values, and they should be separated in different attributes, just like we have here. So we have the data attribute and the target attribute. If you want to know the real names of those species, you can print iris.target names. So the species represented by 0 is setosa, the species represented by 1 is versicolor, and virginica represents the number 2. So as we can see, the first 50 flowers in our list, they are observations of setosa. Then we have 50 observations of versicolor and 50 observations of virginica. So this is the data we have to train our computer. Both the observations and the target look like lists. So we have braces here. This looks like a list of lists. So this is one list, this is another list. This looks like one single list. But those are actually NumPy arrays, which are similar to the lists we know from Python, but they take up less memory and they are much more efficient and faster to loop through than the regular lists. If you want, you can just print the type of, let's say, iris.target. So we can see what we're talking about. So here we have a NumPy ND array. So this is the type of data we have for both the target and the observations. Now, since we have the observations and the target separated in different attributes, it is a good idea to check if they both have the same number of elements, so we can make sure our data is right. So if we have 150 observations here, we need 150 responses here. If this is not the case, there's something wrong in our data, and we won't be able to use it for machine learning. So to test this out, we can print iris.data.shape, which is an attribute from NumPy arrays. So if we do this, we can see 150 and 4, which represents 150 observations and 4 features, which are the 4 measurements we have. If we do the same thing for the target, we can see that we have 150 responses. So we are good to go. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about the Iris dataset, in the next lesson we will learn about KNN, which will be the first statistical model we're going to use to train our computer to do machine learning. I'll see you then.